I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I record this podcast. I am on Yuggabal country, and I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today. Hi, Smart Community friends, and welcome back to this very special series here on the Smart Community Podcast, all about data storytelling as part of my PhD research. In this episode of the Smart Community Podcast, I have a fantastic chat with Kelly Henderson. Kelly is the team leader of digital innovation at Wellington City Council in New Zealand, who is originally from Tauranga in New Zealand. With a background in architecture, urban development, and major transport and infrastructure projects, Kelly now brings a digital lens to local government innovation. In this episode, Kelly tells us about how Wellington City Council uses data visualization and storytelling both internally for decision-making and externally for community engagement. As always, we hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.
Welcome to the Smart Community, Smart Regions, Smart Towns, and Smart Cities. It's where we live, work, and play. With smart communities, the future starts today. Big data, smart mobility, emerging trends galore. The Smart Community Podcast is what you're looking for.
Hello, Kelly. How are you today?
Good as Zoe. I'm good, thanks. Nice to talk to you.
You too. Let's just jump straight in. And can you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us about your background and maybe a little bit about your current work or projects?
My name is Kelly Henderson. I am originally from Tauranga, New Zealand. I live in Wellington and work for Wellington City Council. But my background is more in architecture, urban development, big transport and infrastructure projects, and I now bring a digital lens to that in my role as team leader of digital innovation here at Council.
Amazing. And I know Wellington does so many amazing projects and in the smart city space and lots of things happening, and they always seem to be shifting, changing, progressing, changing direction, pivoting, etc. We won't have time to talk about every single one of those today, but let's just start with how you, or I guess not necessarily just you, but in the council, you use data visualization or storytelling.
Lots of different ways. I mean, Council's a really big organisation with lots of data on the go, right? Lots of projects and lots of things on the go. I think on reflection, when I was trying to think about what we do have happening, we probably don't use visualization as much as people might think. A lot of it is kind of feeding decision-making in the background, but it's often not communicated externally. So I guess we have some major projects. So we have a digital twin that we've used to communicate and raise awareness of the impacts of climate change using climate data and risk data. And we often will share kind of outcomes of decisions and consult with the community using data to make sure that we're kind of telling them the right thing and getting the right advice back from our community about decisions. But we've got a long way to go, actually, I think, in terms of how we visualize our data. And there's, heaps more we can do. It's kind of an exciting space.
Yeah, definitely. I think from a digital twin perspective, and that's one of the things I've been looking at in my research as well, is like what mediums considered for data visualization, and there's so many different ones. So I would say digital twin is a form of data visualization, right? And I guess then you can use that as a medium, but then you can also use that data, or I guess make sense of that data by then taking it into a different data visualization, maybe graphs, charts, pie, whatever. I always go to pie for some reason, pie charts. But yes, and I would also see a digital twin, depending on how we use it, narrative added to it, but as a storytelling mechanism too. And we've seen that, I'm sure Wellington does that too, but I know Melbourne City Council does that quite well from a community communication tool. So I guess lots of mediums available, and then how we apply that data to that medium, or the other way around?
There's a lot of, I guess, like at a base level, like we've got lots of different data storage systems in Council 2, and then we've got a lot of people with kind of data analyst or something like that in their title, and they're kind of using Power BI and tools like that to make dashboards and things. They're actually often for internal use, and our web team has a really hard time with having requests all the time to like publish these dashboards as well, because they're not necessarily consistent. They don't meet our branding guidelines. They don't meet our accessibility guidelines. It's just like a bunch of different dashboards and tools saying different things. So I think it's something that we're really looking at. Like, it's a real priority at the moment, is how we lead from Smart Council, how we lead that data analysis and data stories. I think the digital twin is something that does sort of sit in my team space and I'm much closer to. I think the main thing about that is that it is very powerful and evocative way to engage people with really complex data that they normally wouldn't honestly look at or come across, because it's usually already available, but terrifically boring and hard to understand. So it really helps. A 3D tool helps to really simplify that in a way that people can engage with.
Yeah. That's interesting. Just going back to, I guess, the internal use, because we started talking about community and communicating with community. But I guess from an internal use perspective, it sounds like you do use a lot of data visualizations to help you make decisions. So when you're creating dashboards and things like that, are they for decision makers to then take action from those?
It can be for all sorts of things. Often the biggest driver is communicating through to elected members and decision makers around funding decisions. So a live example is that we as a city were directed to by our elected members to invest really heavily in our bike network. And there was a huge funding program to roll out these connected cycleways. Teams are now under pressure to show that funding was worthwhile and that it's having an impact and it's having the benefits that we were directed to orchestrate. So we're actually using transport sensors, largely AI-driven transport sensors, to bring in that data and show what the usage was before and after. So a live example is that now we've got all this transport data, particularly around bike movements, and we need ways to show, prove the investment case, basically.
Yeah, cool. And then so you've got all this data and then create some kind of visualization, some kind of dashboard to prove the case to decision makers that aren't necessarily experts in data. They want to know that their investment was worthwhile.
Exactly. And then we also have, because under our Local Government Official Information Act, everything we do is transparent and accessible to the public in theory. But in reality, it's like I say, very complex and a whole bunch of data. So we're also inundated with queries from media, all sorts of just people who want to know what is happening on this particular part of the streetscape at this particular time. Is it different to before? And so there's people that are employed that have to kind of go through and find out that information. And I think something we're looking at as a team at the moment is the idea of bridging that data and that transparent endpoint. How do we make the insights piece a little smoother? So rather than it be someone's got to curate something up in Power BI, what tools can we use to have it out there and available? And we've actually been talking to City of Melbourne, I think it's a great example, about what tools are out there and what platforms are out there that we can actually let people draw their own insights rather than having to bottleneck that so much. Yeah.
Like a self-serve kind of system.
Yeah.
So maybe that's you can get your top layer of insight. That might be enough for a lot of those requests. Whereas then, the requests then are if we need to go a little deeper.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's really interesting. And I think it is a challenge, I suppose, to then have something that then suits that audience that then, and that you can show the data that they need, but not necessarily everything. But it's not because you're, hiding it or whatever. It's just that it would completely complicate the whole situation. So what kinds of things then do you do when you are thinking about your audience and like the people that want to interact with that? How do you consider your audience when creating, say, a tool like that or a data visualization?
Yeah, I think this is really, we've actually had someone join the team recently, shout out to Jess Halley, who comes from a user experience like research background. And that's really changing the way we think about this, because she's kind of introducing us to techniques that allow us to first test some of our assumptions about what we think. Like sometimes I think, like particularly for me, I've been in council a few years now, and I can start to have quite an idea myself of how it works and what people think and what the requests are. But when we sort of have been testing some of those assumptions, one of the things she's introduced us to is this idea of using personas that are tailored to what's come out of our assumptions. So, I mean, clearly there are probably people who are way more, this is their field of expertise. You're probably one of them, Zoe. But I think just thinking about and being critical of your own assumptions to start with, of what you're thinking about, what people want to receive, and then trying to diversify who you're thinking about as that end audience. Because usually it's not one individual. Like for us, there's a bunch of roles and a bunch of ways that people want to engage with council. So kind of trying to take the time to test that out. And then also questioning. We have to question, why do you want to communicate this information in this way? Because often what a team internally thinks is the most important thing is not at all what like a member of the public actually cares about. So lots of collaboration, lots of testing of assumptions, and then a bit of trial and error, I think, as well. And making sure we measure what we do so that then we can see, is this having the impact that we thought it might?
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think the application of it is much more interesting than the theory, because like bringing the theory, I mean, it's interesting, obviously, but then actually applying it and seeing how that's changing. And the fact that you said, oh, we're now thinking differently about it means that it's working, like as in, we're doing something a little bit differently. And I think what you said about testing and trialing it and collaborating with, potentially some of those end users or potentially groups that may represent those end users, etc., and challenging your own assumptions is really key. And we know this is a smart city space of like new technology, but also I think from a data perspective and how we communicate with the community is really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think local government can be quite, there's a lot of people trying to perform different functions with limited resource. So it can feel like everyone's a bit stretched and they're just trying to get their job done. And part of what we do is play a bit of a facilitation role and connecting some of those people together. So this team I'm talking about are really concerned about, sharing this information about the bike network. We also want to make sure that we're communicating more broadly in a connected way about transport in the city. And so what else needs to sit alongside that, and how should it be kind of communicated? Yeah. So it's not just a thing happening in a silo over here. It's actually a broader conversation about how transport works within, the whole city or region, really. Yeah, exactly. We did some tests around, like particularly with we use Viva City sensors. We were looking at how we share that information with the public. And we did some tests around like, bringing in like weather data alongside the transport movement. Tells slightly richer story, and especially in a city like Wellington, where our weather's pretty dynamic and it can really change the way people move around. So that, and then we're also looking at our retail spend data, because we're still arguing amongst ourselves about the benefits of sort of pedestrianisation and prioritising people in our urban environment. So being able to show that the more pedestrianised parts of our city have a higher retail spend than that, which they in fact do, but sometimes surfacing that and communicating it really clearly is really difficult, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that really feeds into that storytelling component, right? It's not just like, more people are using the cycling path or whatever, but bringing then the weather, that's another layer of what story are we telling on that day, then bringing, or not necessarily that day, but the trends overall. Then we bring in the spend, because that's another part of our lives. And then that's a huge thing that is really important in creating a, vibrant city that people want to be in. People are moving around, they're spending time, they're feeling safe, they're all these kind of things. And so layering those components, so even, I don't know, like even if you had all of that on whether it's a dashboard, whether it's in a report or whatever, bringing the story in, that narrative in, and adding the context, I think then makes it real for people and can help then, I don't want to say sell the message, because I think it exists already, but being able to push it along. Because as you said, there's so many functions within local government, and not everyone can focus on everything all of the time. And so you really need to, use the information you have to influence then why people care about that thing that you're talking about, which I think is where the storytelling component comes in, because we can humanize it and make sense of it, but then show those positive outcomes and insights as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too, because then you want to always be careful about, is the story you're telling the right story to tell, or is it, and I was talking to a colleague actually just this morning with this project called Track Dem, which is kind of digitizing our decision making in council. So, when council was first established, it was like you write a thing on a piece of paper, decision made, et cetera, this person is the mayor. But we've kind of continued that for like 150 years. It's just that it's a PDF instead of a piece of paper, and it's all stored away somewhere, and really hard for a member of the public to go and find out about the thing that they're actually interested in. So this project kind of like breaks apart meeting minutes into decisions and like allows them to be trackable and kind of interactive in a web format. But what's interesting about that is that there's very little visualization to it, because you need to apply a story to your visualization, and that inevitably you're then kind of like placing a value judgment on these political decisions. So it was really difficult to do. And it's kind of like more left open now, the data, to others to kind of interpret or visualize how they want to, because it tells a powerful story, right? When you start visualizing like how many times, a certain councillor made certain kinds of decisions, it like becomes a pretty strong visual. So that's kind of the other side of it, I guess.
Yeah. I agree. It's interesting because, there's a saying that like, let the numbers speak for themselves, whereas some would argue that no, numbers, no matter how bland or, whatever format, they're telling a story depending on one, who's putting them out there, and two, who's interpreting them. So it's interesting because you kind of like, I don't know, towing a line, or I don't know, feel like I'm on a tightrope or something like that, where you're like, oh, I've got to tell them something, but my bias, I don't want my bias to come through. And so how do you then tell the right story, as you said, when there could be many right stories?
100%. I mean, on the flip side, like with our changing city, the interactive tool using our digital twin most recently, around climate adaptation, we went really deep with the storytelling and had a lot of kind of ongoing like user testing and understanding our kind of design approach for that. And it became really clear that like, all that climate data, someone can go and check it out, but they can't read it. And it's quite abstract. Like, I think, we all know some of the stats around the way our climate destruction is occurring more and more frequently, but it feels quite far removed. And so I think, particularly with that project, like we really lent into the grounding in the landscape and the richness of those stories. And it became kind of almost, there's like, we had part sort of the educational pieces and then part these enriching pieces that really bring you back into the past of what Wellington used to look like, as well as the present, to be able to understand a future. And I think, for me, when I first started working on the project, It's like we were showing this, we've got this lifelike replica of Wellington, and we're showing it in the past before we had this huge earthquake that transformed our topography. And like, I had no idea that there was this major lake in the middle of one of our big suburbs that was then drained for farmland and then built up on for housing, and now suffers from really bad flooding risk, right? So that kind of how you pull those things together. Anyone can access the 1 in 100 year data layer of kind of flooding, but to be able to understand how and why that's connected to the land that it sits on is way more powerful, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Like adding that context. And I imagine you were telling stories like, and again, it's interesting, like it's drawing meaning from the data that already exists rather than manipulating the data to create some kind of meaning that potentially could, exist, but, trying to sell a very particular agenda or something like that. And that's the thing. It can be used in both good and evil and neutral positions too. So when we talk about, I guess, visualization, storytelling, we've already discussed a lot of different projects and things that you've been involved in. I'm thinking about decision making in particular. When you are, I guess, creating some kind of data visualization, whether it's with, I guess, the community wanting to just provide them with information, maybe it is an influence, I don't know, getting them to change their thinking. I guess take us through some of the steps that you would take when you are thinking about communicating using data to either the community or decision makers, and maybe there's some discussion around how those two things would be quite different.
Yeah, great. I might talk about sort of a bit more, almost like my wistful view of how I wish things were more like, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Because I worked for quite a while on one of our major city programs that was called Let's Get Wellington Moving. And it was all around the installation of like both light rail, some State Highway 1 improvements, major roading improvements, and then the kind of idea of catalyzing the urban development that the city needs, because we're growing and we've got kind of 30 to 50,000 more people expected in the city in the next 30 years. What was really tricky was that the political layers of influence in that program were both local and central. And in New Zealand, at least, our central government has quite different attitude and role when it comes to engagement and communication with the community compared to local government, where we're kind of like really that, the buck stops with us. Everyone knows that we're delivering the services that the city needs. So what we didn't do was I think there's a real risk aversion to sharing information early and often. And what you end up doing is black boxing a major project and only showing things that are like 100% certain of being delivered within a certain time. Those points are really hard to get to in those big projects. So we were almost sharing nothing, nothing engaging, nothing visual. We're hesitant about showing what the future of the city could look like in any given time span. And so when it came to the kind of mini decision paths along the way, and I'm particularly thinking like with our elected members here at Wellington City Council, they're faced with this super difficult task, which is, okay, you want me to fund and approve this, say, $140 million piece of this bigger puzzle, but I can't see how that relates to this other project that you've been talking about and this other one over here. And so very, very simply, I wish we were a bit better at just mapping this stuff out, like way, way less sophisticated than a digital twin. Like it would be really awesome if we were better at, rather than just having like 700-page business cases that people can jump in and read. I wish we were a little bit better at like sketching out how we're evolving our decision making in the city. And I think that would help our decision makers immensely, which therefore helps our broader community.
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget that decision makers are also just human beings, and particularly elected members. They've got so many things that they need to consider. Like, they're getting letters from a resident about a pothole, and then they also have to like make these huge decisions about multi-millions of dollars worth of investment, or if we go this way, we're going to reduce emissions by X%. But if we don't do anything, we're actually going to go the opposite direction or flooding or whatever. Like there's so many, these varied things, and just switching your brain from this to that. And sometimes I think we forget that they're human beings.
Yeah, under a lot of pressure, to provide answers to their constituents. So yeah, I might have just used that question as a way to I'm just so passionate about it. Like, I think if we can say that we're not 100% sure, we can talk about the complexities and things that can change. But in my experience, and it's I think really quite pertinent in Wellington, particularly at the moment, where we've had a lot of stuff kind of defunded and we're on a little bit of limbo. It's like, what does the future look like? Like, what are we working towards? We've got major disruption happening in the middle of the city around our civic precinct, and we're transforming that whole area. So it's like, let's show what the future's going to look like, and let's talk about kind of that end point.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like these future scenarios, and I've been actually talking to other people on the podcast as well around that. Like scenario planning or future scenario planning is a form of data visualization where we know that, okay, if this and this and this were true, this is what that future would look like. If this and this, and these are kind of extreme examples of what those futures could be, but they are based on data. And then you can kind of go, if it does happen, it's not the first time you've thought about it, so you can make better decisions about it. Whereas if we don't go all the way there, then that's great too. We might be somewhere in the middle, and we can make better decisions about that as well, because again, it's not the first time we've thought about it, which I think can be really powerful. But it's interesting because we still, in this day and age, value the 800-page business case over someone being able to make that into something that makes sense to a human being.
Totally. And I think if we just talk like specifically around urban development, I think it's kind of treated like we just don't know, we just have no idea how many people might move to the city and what kind of housing might be built and where it might be. It's like there's so much data about that. Like, cities evolve and have trends and have ways of growing. And we've got a lot of information about what that can look like. It's just, it's scary, right? Like people are scared about that level of change in the future. But if we pretend it's not happening, it's happening anyway. We're just not planning for it in the right ways with the right infrastructure, including soft infrastructure, like it's lots of housing is scary for people. But when you kind of start talking about like the extra facilities and actually economic benefit that brings, and the way we can, change our neighborhoods to be set up with schools and more medical facilities and all that stuff because of what that housing is providing, that's a very different story to tell.
And I think you're right. It's a story in its own right, but it's based on this data that is available. But also it's not 100% clear that we're going there, but it is clear that we're going somewhere. And even if we don't make a decision now, if we just put our heads in sand, that's a decision in its own right. And we'll end up in a different future based on that.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because I think, particularly in the smart city space, when we talk about, collecting different data to make better, more informed decisions, I think we need to remember that decisions are being made now. They have to be, whether it is a decision to do something this way or that way, or no decision at all. It's just floating along and, we'll look at that later. It's a decision. That's where if we can have better insight, not necessarily more data, because I think we have a lot of data, but it's also a misnomer that there is this data floating around that we can just grab and use, because if you're not collecting it in the right way, it's completely useless. Or, the nuance in it is not or we don't know how it's been collected or who's collecting it, or, all those things. I think we both have a lot of data, but also, is it the right data that we need? And you just need someone to be there thinking about it. And I think councils are now, some are already investing and have been for years in data analysts and, all these kind of things, but now reaching out more into the urban realm and the city, rather than just like, I've got data on the amount, the number of dogs that or in a council or whatever, and I'm going to make decisions about the dogs. It's like, well, actually, it connects with somebody's whole life. So how do we do that better, make decisions that way better?
Yeah, exactly. And actually, that reminds me. So we've got another quite transformational digital project within Smart Council called Tutuki, and it's around that, exactly what you're saying, our focus on customer experience. Because if you're kind of working here for council and you're in charge of rates, or you're in charge of dogs, or you're in charge of parks, that's kind of what you're thinking about in terms of your customer connection. And Tutuki is a digital project that from Smart Council is trying to flip that around to be, if I'm a resident of Wellington, I'm engaging with council in all these ways already. I don't need 300 different apps, and I don't want them either. I want a forgettable experience in my engagement with council. So yeah, but that's a long journey, right? Because that's as much about the back end as it is about the front end. And we've got some really complex systems that work behind the scenes. So that's a long journey, that one, but very exciting.
Yeah, I remember first getting into smart cities and being like, oh, if a government worked like you had your customer in the center and truly was, the center of the whole experience, and what that would actually look like. And I like how you said the experience is forgettable. That's a really interesting kind of like, oh, well, nothing untoward happened. I, was just able to renew my license and pay for my dog registration, and also get something else, get married. I don't know, have a marriage certificate, all in one simple transaction.
Exactly. Like that team talks about it. Like, people have goals that they're trying to do. They're not trying to have an interaction with council. They're just trying to live their lives,
Yeah, totally. And even like expanding then out to, and I guess all the government, like our government is different to your government as well, but people don't care if it's not council's responsibility and it's transport's responsibility. They're like, I don't care. And having that seamless experience would be, that's the kind of next level. But yeah, the governance in that, the data that you'd need to, like, it's exciting, but also like it still feels a lot well away.
I get really excited about if there could be a future behavior shift from thinking that it's convincing to people to say we're spending $1.8 billion on water infrastructure in the next 10 years, or we are, because water's real topical here, right? And it's a kind of a separate entity from council, but it's sort of controlled by council. So it's a really kind of gritty one for us, and we've got a really aged infrastructure. But this idea that a dollar amount is that's also often how we communicate through our long-term plan too. It's like, we have some visuals and some infographics, but it's about dollar amounts, and this is what your rates are kind of going towards. But I feel like there's so much more we could do in terms of visualizing that. And if I could look, like particularly at our digital city model, and look across to the suburb I live in, and look at all the investment that's happening and around, my workplace where I come to, and my kids where they go to school, and kind of see this picture of where the city is planning infrastructure in the next 10 years. Like, that's way more powerful than a PDF with some numbers in it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just highlighting there that what you're interested to say as a community member is different to what, say, the decision maker is interested in. But it's both coming from the same data source, right? And so telling those two stories they're not false stories, they're not made up, they're not pushing an agenda, but they are two different stories that can come from that same data source, I think is a powerful way to think about it, because then it's not like, oh, well, we've done the visualization of this whatever. There's multiple visualizations that can come from one data source to tell different stories based on who that audience is and what decisions need to be made about, or what information needs to be shared, and then if it's an action, or if it's now as a community member, like, yeah, $1.8 billion doesn't mean anything to me. Like, I don't know, how much does a pipe cost or whatever? And even as an engineer, I'm like, I don't know, is that good? Is that bad? I don't understand. And so we just kind of go, oh, okay, well, they're telling me something, so I guess that's on me to if I don't understand it, it's on me, and then I forget about it because I've got so many other things to think about. Whereas if I start to tell a story of, oh, let's go and have a look, oh, wow, they're putting a new pipe in here, there, whatever. But it also then gives me some more, I guess, incentive to be an active participant in or active community member, because I can feel like I can engage with it because it makes sense. Whereas if it's only, like, if the other bits don't make sense, then it makes it really hard to be an active citizen or community member.
Absolutely. And if I think about, because sometimes it's more work, right? So we've got to think about, like, okay, resourcing for doing this, like what's the value in doing that? And I think it comes down to exactly that, like engaging more genuinely and really diversely with Wellingtonians is like a very genuine priority for our council. And it's really easy to only hear from kind of the same people, but trying to get a broader spread of the people we represent actually feeding back. Honestly, before I worked at council, I never would have submitted on anything. I thought, no one will read that. Like, surely that's just a tick box. Now I know there's like whole systems in place to really take that feedback and generate, summaries and advice and all sorts of things out of it. Like, it's really meaningful. And then the other thing that I think is that it's quite hard to measure, and it's a little bit maybe amorphous, but consensus building and trust building with the community is so important for government, because when we know there's evidence, we know when trust is low and we don't have that consensus, we're way less efficient. We're spending all our time trying to justify decisions and relitigate things that have happened before. And when trust is higher, we can actually just get on with our work and delivering what we need to. So it's like hugely important, but really hard to quantify that if the impact of what you're doing is building trust or not in specific ways. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that measuring of the effectiveness of whether it's a visualization or whether it's, project or whatever. And as you said, it does take effort. Like, it's not just like, oh, we're just not doing it, even though, like, it'd take me 5 minutes to whip up a nice, data visualization or story. No, it does take effort, but it's that then measuring the effectiveness. So maybe it is, having it as a metric in the overall, like, when we do a project, is there a KPI that is, were we able to build trust or, whatever it is. And again, those things are hard to measure, but not necessarily impossible. And now with tools, like, we've got a lot of more accessible tools available that community members can use. There's like this next level of like accessible tools for more, I guess, inside business. And like, so you might still be a professional in your field, but you can then play around with data a little bit more. So there's like these, there's so many different tools and becoming more and more accessible. So being able to then play around with those and sometimes, they can offer really good insight. But then once you've been able to, play around, measure, whatever, then you can build to the next level if you need something more deeper or whatever. I guess the point of the story is, there are a lot more accessible tools, but we need critical thinking to go along with those as well, because we don't want then just a series of black boxes around that. It's like, oh, well, the thing told me it was this. It's like, well, no, that's still, there's still a lot of, still needs the expertise or the critical thinking behind it to then work out what's happening.
Completely agree. I think so too. And I mean, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how we improve our behavior around what it means to actually share data, like just quite generally. Like, I think just because we've collected some data and we've like uploaded the raw files on our portal where someone can, play around with them, doesn't mean that that's accessible. It doesn't mean that even people who have the abilities to engage with it know that it's there. There's so many ways that we can kind of bring people along a little bit better.
Yeah, and there's still effort involved, right? And I think what you said earlier around transparency, how, like, technically being transparent is to upload all the raw data. but to be accessible, it's actually creating the visualizations or stories that go behind it, which is kind of like decreasing the transparency because it's like a version of it. I don't know, as you were talking, I was like, but also then it makes it more like, I guess the transparencies are there because then you can go and dig in the data if you wanted to, but like it's actually morphing it into something that actually makes it a communication tool or like a way that somebody can engage with it. Because even like I've played with open data and like it's hard and like then I have to go and and it's still a lot of effort, and then you work out, oh well, you have to kind of on your way assess the effort versus impact of playing with this. Like there's so many things. It's interesting because it's like, well, for a council it's also effort. So how do you build it into your project? Or
really so challenging. Like I now consider myself like such a data nerd, but cannot engage actually with data at all. Like I open a file like that and I'm like, this is not for me. And we have these like really skilled, technically minded people kind of running our data warehouse and really wanting to kind of service the rest of the organization. But I'm learning that there's this real need for, like you say, critical thinking and strategic thinking to help bridge the gaps between like what questions people actually want to know. Even our just senior leaders, like not our elected members, but like our senior official leaders, the questions that they have about how their business units are operating and kind of what they want to know. Connecting that right down with, our, all the data we have now around parking, for example. It's like there's quite a lot there, and being able to summarize and like effectively communicate stuff.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. Like local council could learn a lot from, say, a commercial organization because they've invested in those people that go down to the parking because it makes them money at the end of the day. And that's not why council are doing it, but you can learn effective techniques that then, or look at how they invest in things. Because the only reason they're only investing in it because it has a benefit, and the benefit is normally financial. However, you can take those things that you need from a local government perspective and then the benefit being, better customers, whatever the metric is, right?
Completely. And I completely agree with that. Applying that commercial mindset to what we do. Actually, in the time I've been at council, it's become more and more of a constrained fiscal environment just because of wide economic conditions and like I talked about the infrastructure deficit and all that kind of thing. So there is actually a commercial rationale for doing that because we have an obligation to do things efficiently and effectively, and we actually need to survive as a city. And that's where I suppose that's the value offering almost of this kind of beautiful hodgepodge of people that call ourselves innovators within Smart Council, is we do talk about like with being the bridge between all these different things, and that's kind of what we try and offer. I was going to say something else before too, which like I'm always reminded of this time when I was trying to support or make a recommendation around decision making to a really senior like executive, a couple of them, and I was sort of talking through this thing and then realized that this like super intelligent, like I really respected this person, had no idea what we were looking at. And I thought it was so simple, like I thought we were just looking at this like real basic plan with few numbers. But I often think of that because we need to be really adaptable to how other people think when we're thinking about this stuff. It's not usually like us. And I guess, as someone who I suppose has spent my career in like visual stuff, it's like you've got to remember that you really need to cater to your audience, and they can be very, very different and have different ways of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's really valuable and something that I forget too sometimes. It's like, but this makes sense. No. It only makes sense to me because I've been looking at it for the last 3 months, and like also it's not useful to then point out that person doesn't understand it. You're the one that's actually failed in the sense that
absolutely
the person doing the thing because it's like, well, yeah, you need to bring them along and not the other way round. If you need the decision to be made, then you damn well better understand what they need to be able to make that decision, right?
It's the job. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's finish on any suggestions for listeners to use data storytelling in their own work or life.
I think, leading on from that, whatever you think you need to make, I reckon it's probably 10 times simpler than what you think. I'm a bit of a simplicity evangelist. And also test. Don't launch into coloring in this huge canvas without breaking it up into little pieces that you can test along the way. We've definitely been caught out with that before. And then I could go on forever, but I guess also whatever you're delivering, really, especially when people multidisciplinary teams are involved, which are my favorite today, make sure you're really crystal clear about scope so that you're all kind of aligned in terms of what you're working towards. Usually you can't do much by yourself. So you're working in a team of people and you need to be, really clear about what you're kind of working towards. And then, my other thing would be, don't be sucked into this idea that it's got to be super technical and it's hard science and it's graphs and lines or it's valueless. I think we need a much more nuanced idea of what data is and what it means, and don't be afraid to bring in emotion and real sentiment and depth to what you're doing, even if it feels scary and a little bit might be labeled as impractical or whatever. Really all data is emotive and all you're doing is making it stronger in what you're doing with your storytelling. So
amazing. What a beautiful way to finish this podcast. Thank you so much, Kelly, for joining me.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.
This was great, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Hi, Zoe. See
Bye. Thanks so much for listening to the Smart Community Podcast. You can find the show notes for this episode and all other episodes at zoeether.com/podcast. That's zoeeather.com/podcast. Have you got a question for me or one of our guests? We'd love to hear from you. Just shoot us an email at hello@mysmart.community. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you follow the podcast wherever you listen and connect with us on LinkedIn too. And hey, ratings and reviews are always welcome. They help more smart humans just like you find the show. As always, we hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as we enjoyed making it.